You've been skimming. I know you have. The words, delivered with a chillingly calm finality, hung in the air like a death sentence. My daughter, Sarah, sat across from me, her eyes, once so full of childish wonder, now sharp and calculating, bore into mine. The expensive silk of her blouse whispered as she shifted, the faint scent of her designer perfume a jarring contrast to the stale air of my small, cozy kitchen. The morning sun, usually a source of comfort, seemed to mock me, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the accusatory beam. I could feel a faint tremor start in my hands, a betrayal of the composure I was desperately trying to maintain. I'd spent the last 20 years building her up, sacrificing my own dreams, my own comfort, to give her the best possible life. And this was my reward. Life, for a long time, had been a quiet hum of routine. After my husband passed when Sarah was just a teenager, I'd poured everything into her. I worked tirelessly, taking on extra shifts, foregoing vacations, all so she could have the best education, the best opportunities. She was bright, so very bright, and I'd always told her she could achieve anything she set her mind to. I encouraged her ambition, nurtured her drive, celebrated her every small victory. I'd watched her graduate with honors, land that first coveted internship, climb the corporate ladder with an almost unnerving speed. Her success was my success, a reflection of all my sacrifices. But somewhere along the way, her ambition had curdled into something harder, something I didn't recognize. It started subtly. Little digs about my simple life, my limited horizons. Comments about how I should be investing more wisely, advice that felt more like thinly veiled criticism. I remembered one particular Christmas. Sarah, already a rising star in her company, had gifted herself a designer handbag, the kind I'd only ever seen in magazines. She'd unwrapped it with a theatrical flourish, then casually asked if I thought it was too much. My own gift to her, a hand-knitted scarf, felt suddenly inadequate, pathetic. Later that evening, while I was clearing plates, I'd overheard her on the phone with her boyfriend, laughing about how I still lived like a student. It stung, a sharp, unexpected jab. Then there was the time she decided to help me manage my finances. She'd insisted on setting up a new online banking platform, claiming my old system was antiquated and risky. I'd felt a flicker of unease, a sense of losing control, but dismissed it as her being helpful, as her caring for me. She'd spent hours on my laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration, and when she was done, she'd patted my hand and said, "There. Much better. Now we don't have to worry about any surprises." The irony of that statement, I'd realize later, was almost unbearable. I'd even found myself apologizing for small purchases, explaining them away as if I needed her permission. The constant undercurrent of her judgment had worn me down, eroding my confidence until I felt like a child dependent on her approval. The accusation had been delivered on a Tuesday morning, a day usually marked by the comforting rhythm of my volunteering at the local library. I'd been making my usual pot of Earl Grey, the steam rising in gentle curls, when her car, the sleek, expensive model she'd bought with her hard-earned money, pulled into my driveway. She rarely visited without an announcement, a pre-scheduled appointment. Her arrival was an intrusion, a disruption. She walked in without knocking, her presence immediately filling the small space with an unsettling tension. She'd refused my offer of tea, her gaze sweeping dismissively over my modest living room. The antique armchair, a cherished piece of furniture passed down from my grandmother, seemed to shrink under her critical stare. She'd paced for a moment, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floor, before turning to face me, her expression unreadable. And then, she'd spoken those words. "You've been skimming. I know you have." The tea kettle whistled, a shrill, piercing sound that seemed to amplify the shock coursing through me. My hand, still holding the teapot, trembled. I set it down carefully, my heart pounding a frantic, uneven rhythm against my ribs. "Skimming what, Sarah?" My voice, when it finally came, was a whisper, rough and uncertain. She walked over to the small desk in the corner, the one where I paid my bills and managed my affairs. She picked up a single envelope, a statement from my brokerage account, unopened. My breath hitched. I'd been meaning to open it, but hadn't gotten around to it. It was from the modest portfolio I'd carefully built over the years, the one that represented my retirement and a small inheritance from my parents. It was my future. Your salary, she stated, her tone utterly devoid of emotion. From the company I built. My salary. My mind reeled. How could she possibly think that? I'd ever worked for her company. I was retired. I lived off my pension and my investments. The accusation was ludicrous, insane. Sarah, I don't understand. I haven't worked for you. I haven't been near your company in years. She gave a short, sharp laugh, a sound that scraped against my nerves. Oh, Mother. Please. You think I'm stupid? You think I don't track my own finances? Every quarter, there's a discrepancy. Small, yes. Easily overlooked by someone who isn't paying attention. But I pay attention. I always have. She waved the statement. This is where the money is going. Into your account. My blood ran cold. The statement in her hand was from my personal brokerage account. The one she'd so helpfully set up for me. The one she had full online access to, a fact I'd forgotten, a fact I'd been too naive to question. She'd never mentioned needing access to accounts. She'd framed it as a security measure for benefit. The careful precision of her words, the calculated implication, the sheer audacity, it was all too much. The realization hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just accused me. She'd orchestrated this. Sarah, that's impossible, I pleaded, my voice rising despite myself. There must be a mistake. Perhaps you're looking at the wrong account. She slammed the statement back onto the desk. There is no mistake. You've been siphoning funds from my salary, disguising them as investment returns. It's a simple scheme, but it's been effective. Until now. She crossed her arms, her posture radiating an infuriating sense of smug certainty. I've been watching it for months, just waiting for you to slip up. And here we are. The silence that followed was deafening. The clock on the mantelpiece ticked loudly, each second a hammer blow against my shattered trust. I looked at her, at the daughter I'd raised, the daughter I'd loved unconditionally, and saw a stranger. A cold, calculating stranger who had woven a web of deceit and was now ready to ensnare me in it. The hurt was a dull ache, but beneath it, a flicker of something else ignited. A cold, quiet rage. The next few days were a blur of frantic disbelief and a gnawing sense of injustice. I tried to reason with her, to explain the absurdity of her claim, but she was impenetrable. Every argument I presented was met with a dismissive wave of her hand or a condescending sigh. She'd even gone so far as to contact my bank, placing an alert on my account, an act that felt like a violation of my privacy, a public condemnation before any wrongdoing had been proven. The weight of her accusation was crushing, and I found myself withdrawing, the vibrant colors of my life fading into a muted gray. I spent hours poring over my statements, trying to find an explanation, a mistake, anything that would absolve me in her eyes. But there was nothing. The figures were clear, and Sarah's narrative, however outlandish, had a certain logic to it. Then, one evening, staring at my laptop screen, a thought, cold and clear, pierced through the fog of my distress. Sarah's expertise was in finance, in corporate law. She understood complex financial instruments and intricate legal loopholes. She'd built her empire on an understanding of systems, on leveraging them to her advantage. And she had, with deliberate foresight, given herself access to my systems. The online banking, the brokerage account, she had the keys. The thought began to take root, a dark seed of an idea. She was so confident in her own intellect, her own ability to manipulate and control. She assumed I was just a naive old woman, easily bewildered and intimidated. She was wrong. The next morning, I woke with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. I didn't scream or cry or confront her. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea, the familiar ritual, a calming balm. I opened my laptop and navigated to a specific website, one I'd discovered through hours of quiet research. It wasn't a place Sarah would ever think to look. It was a repository of legal documents, of forgotten clauses, of the fine print that people like Sarah often overlooked, deeming it too mundane, too irrelevant. I'd spent years compiling information, a quiet hobby born from a lifelong love of reading and a desire for self-sufficiency. It was a knowledge base she never knew existed. I found the document I was looking for. It was a legal agreement, one I'd signed years ago when I'd initially set up my investment portfolio. It was a rather standard power of attorney clause, designed to give a trusted individual the ability to manage assets in case of incapacitation. I'd signed it at my husband's insistence, a precautionary measure in case of his prolonged illness. He'd been meticulous about planning. Crucially, I'd included a specific clause, one that Sarah, in her haste to gain access and control, had clearly missed. It stipulated that the power of attorney would be revoked upon proof of willful neglect or malicious intent by the designated PA. Rudy. And my daughter, with her accusation and her intrusive actions, had provided precisely that. With steady hands, I drafted a formal revocation. I attached the digital copies of her accusatory emails, her bank's notification of the account alert, and a timestamped screenshot of her accessing my online portal from her own IP address, just days before her confrontation. I then printed a physical copy, ensuring it was witnessed and notarized by a local attorney, a man I'd known for years and who respected my quiet integrity. It was an act of quiet precision, a surgical strike against her arrogance. I didn't need to yell, didn't need to plead. The documents spoke for themselves. I scheduled a meeting at her office, a sterile, glass and steel monument to her success. She greeted me with a practiced, cool smile, clearly expecting another round of pathetic pleading. She led me into her expansive corner office, the city skyline a glittering backdrop to her triumph. She sat behind her enormous desk, the same one I'd seen in countless articles about her. "Mother, I'm busy. If this is about apologizing, I suggest you get to it." Her voice was sharp, impatient. I walked over to her desk, not looking at her, but at the polished surface. I placed the thick envelope gently in front of her. "This is for you, Sarah." She picked it up, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, quickly replaced by annoyance. She flipped it open, her eyes scanning the top page. The cool smile faltered. Her brow furrowed. She turned the page. And then another. The color drained from her face, leaving it ashen. Her hands, which had been resting so confidently on the desk, clenched into fists. The subtle scent of her perfume seemed to dissipate, replaced by the sterile air of her office. "What is this?" she whispered, her voice suddenly reedy. "It's the revocation of your power of attorney over my accounts," I said, my voice calm and even. "Effective immediately. Along with a formal complaint filed with the legal board regarding your unauthorized access and baseless accusations." Her eyes darted frantically over the pages, searching for an escape, a loophole. But there was none. The notarized documents, the evidence of her own actions, were irrefutable. Her carefully constructed world of control began to crumble around her. The sheer audacity of her plan had blinded her to the possibility of me fighting back, and fighting back effectively. The arrogance she'd displayed in accusing me of theft had been her undoing. The aftermath was swift and brutal, though it played out entirely in the digital and legal realms. Frantic text messages flooded my phone, each one more desperate than the last. I didn't respond. Then came the calls from other family members, her flying monkeys, tasked with appealing to my maternal heart, with guilt tripping me into backing down. My sister, always easily swayed by Sarah's charm, called in tears. My uncle, who owed Sarah a significant debt, offered thinly veiled threats. I listened politely, then ended each call. My quiet resolution had created ripples, and the shockwaves were now reaching them. Sarah's professional reputation, built on an image of ruthless efficiency and unimpeachable integrity, began to crack. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into outright speculation. Her board, alerted to the legal complaint and the internal financial review it triggered, initiated their own investigation. The story, twisted and sensationalized, began to leak. The CEO accused of stealing from her own mother, now facing a countersuit for financial misconduct. The irony was almost poetic. Within weeks, her carefully constructed edifice began to crumble. A forced resignation followed, then a quiet divestment of her shares. The social consequences were more immediate and perhaps more devastating to her ego. The people she'd courted, the influencers she'd impressed, the associates she'd relied on for her image, all began to distance themselves. Her meticulously curated social media presence went dark. The whispers of her downfall became a roaring chorus. I sat in my kitchen, the morning sun now a gentle, warm embrace. The tea kettle whistled, a sound of comfort and peace. I looked at my hands, steady and calm. There was no triumph, no gloating. Just a quiet sense of finality. The emotional justice wasn't in her ruin, but in the reclaiming of my own agency. The quiet execution of a plan, born not of anger, but of a deep, unyielding need for truth and self-preservation. She had tried to strip me of everything, to paint me as a thief. In the end, she had only succeeded in revealing her own emptiness, her own profound lack of integrity, and in the process, had lost herself. And I was finally free.